Good morning, everybody. It's May 3rd, and it is a beautiful Sunday morning here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And today I want to discuss with you how to Florida weave vegetables in your vegetable garden. Florida weave is a very inventive and very economical and fast way of staking your plants. All it takes is stake and string and nothing else. So it's very cheap and it's very easy and everyone can do it. To my left here, you'll see a number of tomato plants that I have all trellised with string using the Florida weave method. And I want to explain to you exactly what that method is and what you need. Now, before I get into how to Florida weave, let's discuss when you should use Florida weaving. Florida weaving is great for any kind of vegetable that grows upright and bush-like. Some great candidates for Florida weave are determinate type tomatoes and dwarf type tomatoes because they grow upright like a bush. Peppers are fantastic candidates for Florida weaving. So is squash. So are eggplant. Anything that grows upright and rigid and just needs a little bit of support. What is not appropriate for Florida weave is anything that grows like a vine. So your more traditional indeterminate type tomatoes that grow into 6-7 foot vines and need to be staked upright with supports and ties, they are not candidates for Florida weave. These here are my indeterminate tomatoes, and in my climate it's pretty warm and they tend to get to be about 7 to 10 feet tall before they're killed off by disease. And the reason why I don't recommend Florida weave for indeterminate tomatoes is because you are going to need very large 8 to 10 feet tall stakes in between all the plants. So my thought is if you're going to need all of that infrastructure, why not just stake them anyway, since you need all of those stakes? And I'll link to a video above where I single stem staked all of my tomato plants. That is a great, easy, and cheap way to stake up your indeterminate tomato plants. You'll see this year I have everything growing on a string trellis, and I think this may be the best way to grow indeterminate tomato plants. However, I'll also link to a video above where I wire trellised my tomatoes, and that worked out very well for indeterminates. If you're a commercial grower and you need to quickly stake up hundreds of tomato plants, I think the Florida weave makes sense for indeterminates. But if you're a backyard grower and you only have a few plants or just a couple of dozen, I think you're better off either doing this string trellising method or a wire trellising method, since you'll have to purchase a lot less stakes and T-posts and really tall infrastructure. So all of the tomatoes that I have here to my left, these are all bush types. This is a determinate celebrity. These are all various dwarf type tomatoes that all grow upright. So those are excellent candidates for Florida weave. Now that we've discussed what to use Florida weave on, let's discuss what you need. The only things that you need are string and stakes. So let's start with stakes first. For your determinate and dwarf style tomatoes, I recommend using a 4-foot stake because you're going to have to pound everything 1 foot into the ground. The stakes are going to have to be very rigid and very strong and not able to be pulled over by any kinds of wind. So you need a 4-foot stake will give you about 3 foot sticking above ground. So what I like to do for my tomatoes is I buy 8-foot furring strips for about $1.50 at Lowe's or Home Depot. You cut them in half and then you just cut them with a handsaw into a point. For peppers, you can get 3-foot stakes, and they sell them by the bundle at Lowe's for a dozen for about $4, and they come like this. They're just contractor stakes. You'll pound them into the ground, so you'll have 2 feet sticking above grade, and that's exactly what you need for peppers, since they only tend to grow about 2 to 3 feet tall. Other great candidates are rebar, T-posts or U-posts, anything that is rigid and strong and can be pounded into the ground with a mallet. You have to drive them at least 12 inches deep so they're nice and sturdy. But the thing that you really want to make sure of is that you have a lot of friction in that surface. You don't want to use any kind of smooth plastic where the twine that you use to hold everything together won't be able to grab onto. So that's why rebar, T-posts, and wood are such good candidates, because they're rigid and they have a lot of friction. The only other thing that you'll need for this is twine for support. But there is something that you should know. I recommend against using a cotton twine or anything natural, because what happens is when they get wet, they start to sag. So your Florida weave method needs to be very tight, very taut. So if you use a natural fiber and it starts to bend and sag over time, you're going to lose all the rigidity in your string, and then your trellis is going to fall apart. So this right here is a nylon twine. I think it was maybe $7 for 500 feet of it on Amazon, and I will place it in my Amazon storefront in the video description in case you want this exact type, but any type of synthetic twine will do, and again I recommend nylon, because it will not weaken and sag over time as it gets wet and dries. And the only other things that you'll need is a mallet to pound your stakes into the ground and some type of cutting tool to cut your twine. Now that I've explained all that you need, I will show you how to do this. And here is an example row of tomatoes that I've already Florida woven together. So what I found for tomatoes is it is best to place a stake every 2 plants. So every other plant will get a stake. You don't want to spread them out any more than that, because then you will start to lose the rigidity of your trellis. For peppers, I have found that 2 stakes can easily tie together 4 pepper plants. So for pepper plants, place your stakes every 4 plants. So generally with Florida weaving, you want to add a new row of string about every 6 to 12 inches. So right now these pepper plants are about 1 foot tall. They are ideal candidates for Florida weaving because they can start getting damaged by wind if they get any taller. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take your twine and you want to wrap this around your support stake tightly. It has to be very tight, and you want to wrap it around at least 3 times, and then you want to tie it snug. It is incredibly important that everything is very tight and rigid. There can't be any slack, because if there's any slack, there is not going to be any support in your weave. Remember, it's the string that causes all of the tension here, so if there's any slack, there's not going to be any support because you won't have any tension. So what you want to do is you want to take the string and you want to weave it around every other pepper. So I'm going to go around the back of this pepper, and then the front of this pepper. I'm going to go around the back of the 3rd pepper, and then the front of the 4th pepper. Now here's the important part. After the final pepper or tomato or whatever vegetable you are trellising, you want to go around the back of the pole of your stake support. So here I have the pepper, the string support around the front of the pepper. I'm going to go behind it to the pole, and I'm going to pull it nice and firm, nice and tight, no slack at all. And I'm going to wrap this around the pole. I'm going to wrap this around my stake 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And more is better than less. So I'm going to come around the opposite end. Remember, we started around the back of the pole. Now I'm at the front of the pole, and I'm going to come behind the pepper this time. We're essentially weaving in this pepper as support. And then after I go around this pepper, I'm going to come around to the front of this pepper. So the original string passed behind the pepper, now we're in the front. Then you want to try and pick up the foliage to make sure you're right up against the the stems. You don't want to rip off any of your leaves if at all possible. So now I'm going to come around the back of this pepper, of the other 3rd pepper here, and I'm going to come around the front of this pepper, and then cross back over around the stake, so everything is basically pinched together, and that is what's going to provide our support. And again, I'm going to pull it nice and snug and tight, but not so tight that I cut into the stems of the peppers. That's the important thing. You don't want to damage your peppers. And then once again, I'm going to wrap this around 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And again, making sure everything is nice and tight. See, I'm checking this again for slack. There's a little bit of slack in here, so I want to try and pull that out. Now that little bit of slack is gone, you see everything's nice and tight in here. If I were to flick these back and forth, you see how the string holds them very well? Then I'm going to take my cutting tool of my choice. I'm going to cut that off, and I left a little tail that I'm just going to turn into a simple double knot. And that's all there is to it. And what I'm going to do is, when these grow about another 8 inches or so, I will put a second row of string up here, about roughly every 6 inches or so, and that will take the peppers all the way throughout the season. And again, my pepper plants are not going to become this tall. This is a simple 3-foot stake that's smacked into the ground roughly about a foot, maybe 10 to 12 inches. And that's going to give me more than enough staking capacity for these peppers all throughout the year. With tomatoes, it's a similar story. The only thing with tomatoes is because the stems are so much thicker, you don't necessarily have to wrap everything just around the vines. You can also grab some of the foliage and kind of hold everything up like one big basket. So, same story. I'm going to go up here about 6 to 12 inches above where my first tie is, and I'm going to wrap around this 3 times. 1, 2, 3, to make it nice and tight. And I'm going to make sure that I leave a nice little tail of twine right here for something to tie onto when I bring the final string around. Now that's on there nice and tight, I'm going to bring it around the back side of the plant to start. Since the string is over here on the front. And the trickiest part about all of this is just to make sure that everything is nice and secure and that you're not cutting off the circulation of the plant. And now that I'm firmly and comfortably on the back, I'm going to take this other plant and I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to scoop it almost. And I'm going to hold that in place, wrap it around 3 times. 1, 2, after I pull it nice and tight. 1, 2, 3. Again, make sure that you have that tension. So I went back, front. Now I'm in the front of this stake. I'm going to come around the back. I'm going to pick up this plant. Again, try to keep the string level the whole time. I'm going to pick up that plant, go around the back of that plant, and I'm going to come around the front of this plant, and then I'm going to come around the back of the stake. And again, I'm going to pull it nice and tight, make sure that the plant is held on. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 times around. Then I'm going to come around the front of this stake and then around the back of this plant because the initial tie is in the front. So again, we're weaving here. Come around this one to the front. Try and pick it up. Come around the back of this stake so everything's all nice and held together. 1, 2, 3. And come around the back of this plant because again we're going to scoop the plant to hold it in place, and then come around the front of this plant. We're going to once again go around the plant or around the stake. 1, 2. Oops, a little loose. Pull that slack out of there. 1, 2. 3rd time's the charm. Make sure I give myself plenty of additional tie wire. And I'm going to tie this together. And just like that, I just staked up 4 tomato plants. Think about how much time that would take with traditional stakes and ties. And the nice thing about the Florida weave is you get much more airflow than you would if you were simply staking. Because the Florida weave keeps everything nice and open, you get similar airflow to if you were trellising, and airflow helps keep diseases to a minimum. And the only thing easier than Florida weave is to throw a tomato cage on there. But the reason why I don't like tomato cages is because you are creating a breeding ground for disease by not giving proper airflow. And here you can see there is weave holding up the tomato there, right at the base. There's weave holding the tomato here, and there is weave holding the tomato at the top. You'll also notice that I'm starting to get some tomato diseases, and it's been almost a record wet April. It has been so wet and it's creating leaf spot, but I have everything under control using copper and hydrogen peroxide. And I will make sure to link to that video above as to how to control tomato diseases with copper and hydrogen peroxide, because it's a real thing, especially when you live on the coast right by the ocean like I do. One other thing that I'd like to mention is it has been a crazy windy spring here in the south. We have had just brutal storm after brutal storm, and we must have had, over the course of March and April, at least 3 or 4 storms that had 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts, and the regular old winds have been pretty high throughout the spring. And despite these wind gusts, every single tomato plant and pepper plant that I have had trellised with this Florida weave method has suffered no damage at all. I have not had one single snapped or damaged plant that was actually secured with the Florida weave method that got damaged in any of the 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts that we've had multiple times throughout the spring. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you Florida weave tomatoes, peppers, and other garden vegetables. It's a really easy, affordable, and fast way to add support to your vegetable garden. And it can be life-changing if you're somebody like me that has to spend a lot of time tying up tomatoes to stakes. This is a great time saver, and I really recommend it. Everyone, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you found it helpful, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about anything that I use in my garden in general, please check out my Amazon storefront, linked in the video description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.